It's time to take a ride on the Steelers Afternoon Drive with our co-hosts, Alan Saunders and Zachary Smith.
Welcome back to another episode of Steelers Afternoon Drive. I'm Zachary Smith. That is Alan Saunders. Alan, it's only like the same amount of time has gone past since we've done one of these, typical Friday to Monday. But I don't know why. It just feels like it's been a while since we've been on the screen with us two. Maybe we had DB on here Friday. That's always good. But us two back in the saddle. I don't know why it felt like longer.
Felt like longer because I had like a 17-and-a-half-hour workday on Saturday. And then went
to and from same day.
Yeah, I'm getting too old for that shit.
Man,
it's bad. And then was like a raccoon waking up from hibernation this morning. It's at 8 a.m. Jeez, got a video to record.
Do you feel? I mean, obviously, like for work, you have to do it, and you still get a ton of content out for the site and everything like that. Do you feel like worse about it though because it's a preseason game as opposed to a regular season game that you're putting that amount of time in for?
Yes.
Okay. I feel like that's how I would feel about it, but I wanted to see.
Well, it's actually it's kind of my own fault because if it was a regular season game, I would have never done that.
Mm-hmm.
I would have stayed the night before or after, one or the other. Like I don't do that for regular season games. But because it was only a preseason game and I know nobody really cares anyway, I didn't want to spend the extra money and take the extra time away from my family, so I do dumb stuff.
We'll pretend that you already having that long of a day is the reason that we didn't do a post-game show, when in reality, we both literally just forgot about it until like 2 hours after the game was over. And
I'll take the blame for that one. No,
my co-host of the other podcast I do around the 412, Tyler, was home last week, with the wild things thing we had going on and stuff like that. So he came over Saturday to watch the preseason game, and it just completely slipped my mind because hanging out with him and his wife. So but either way, we're back now, and that just means that we can talk about maybe some of the stuff that we didn't get to talk to on there and kind of go back over the preseason, maybe who played themselves onto and off of the roster. We got a question, of course, as we always try to get in at the end of the episode as well. But Alan, let's start at the beginning there with what I said. Just kind of going back over the preseason at this point, who do you feel like, you felt comfortable coming into the preseason saying this guy I think is going to be on the roster, or maybe you didn't have on your 53 that you now have to adjust, like this guy played himself on?
So I think the one guy that I thought had really done a nice job of playing himself on was sadly Ryan Watts, who gets hurt in the end of that last game, the last play of that last game with the stinger. And, I had status totally up in the air. Seems like a guy who could maybe end up on the injured reserve now. We'll see as we get to tomorrow. They do have those two slots now where they don't have to make the 53 and can go straight to the IR. So you're probably looking at guys like Dylan Cook, maybe Troy Fautanu, and maybe Jeremiah Moon. But I think there's some options there if they're looking to get a couple guys back from the IR. But I think he is definitely a guy who played his way onto the roster. I think Scotty Miller is a guy who played his way onto the roster, both with his play as a wide receiver. And, I don't think he was necessarily great as a punt gunner, but he seemed to be getting a lot of opportunities. I have him as a wide receiver 5 anyway. If he's going to be the wide receiver 5 and a punt gunner, he's on the 53 for me. And he's a guy that I think coming out of the spring, I did not have on the 53-man roster. I think he's just very consistent. I think that's part of it. I do think his skill set is very duplicative of Roman Wilson and Calvin Austin, but that's minimized a little bit because Roman Wilson's not healthy. And so we haven't been seeing him out there. So until Roman Wilson kind of even if he gets healthy and even if he is ready to play in week 1, what kind of role you want to give a rookie who hasn't played in a month? I think it's less of an issue for week 1. Maybe down the road, you would look at the mix there and say, oh, why would we have Scotty Miller here if we have Roman Wilson and Calvin Austin? Maybe, a guy like Watts gets healthy, or someone like Darius Rush or Beanie Bishop kind of begins to pick up the gunner role and is able to run with it. Maybe down the road you could find a way, where you decide you don't want to keep Scotty Miller. But I think right now he's a guy who's on the team. We talked about. Good. Yeah.
Before you go further, I have a question about that. It's kind of a two-parter. With that being the case with Scotty Miller as wide receiver 5, is that just because right now you kind of have to operate like with what's on the roster and not predicting an outside guy? Because if they bring in somebody else, you would think that he'd be the first one off. But also, this kind of entered my mind as you were talking about the gunner thing too, because we've talked about they need one. If they bring in a receiver that also doesn't do that, despite how I don't want to say bad, but lack of talent there is in the wide receiver room at the bottom, especially there. Is it possible that they would have to carry 6 if one of them is able to be a gunner?
Yeah, absolutely. That's where I think I think Mark Robinson had a really nice preseason, but I think there's one too many linebackers there if that scenario plays out, where you feel like you need to keep Scotty Miller because he's a gunner and they don't have another gunner, and then they're able to get their hands on a wide receiver, and we're going to talk about wide receiver stuff at some point here. Then I think you could probably that's a spot that could go back the other way, back to offense and add a 6th wide receiver. Absolutely. Yeah. They also could keep one less offensive lineman. If they were really confident in Mason McCormick's ability to play center or Spencer Anderson's ability to play center in a pinch, if Dylan Cook is going to start on the IR, they don't necessarily need to add another offensive lineman to the 53 if they are confident in those guys being able to play center.
Sure. Yeah, and the Ryan Watts thing was a bummer. Literally, like you said, it was the last play where there was contact because then they were just kneeling the ball out after that play. But a stinger. It's just so open. That's what we heard about Trenton Thompson last year, and then we didn't see him again. So, who knows how this is going to play out for Ryan Watts, but what a disappointment. I felt the same way that he had played himself on to the 53. What about the reverse side of that? Were there guys that you thought, this guy's a really good shot, and then they didn't perform the way that you thought they were going to?
Quez Watkins is a guy I thought coming into the offseason would be on this team. I thought he did good things in Philadelphia. I thought given the sort of total lack of wide receiver talent that we would see him be able to get a bigger opportunity than he really got in the past, and maybe he'd be able to run with it. I just never saw that happen. Inconsistent hands, didn't work out on special teams. So I don't see him making the roster. Other guys that maybe played their way off the roster. Outside of
Do you see a scenario where Beanie Bishop played himself on and then off? Or do you think
I think he's going to make the roster. I'm just not sure how much he's going to play. But I think Beanie's shown enough that they're not going to want to put him through waivers. It's different. So when you look at the other guys in that room, the other guys that could be cut if you need to cut a corner. Darius Rush has been through waivers a couple times. Was sitting on somebody's practice squad last year. Thomas Graham has been through waivers about 6 times. Was sitting on a practice squad all last year. If teams really wanted those guys, they'd have them. Beanie signed with the Steelers as an undrafted free agent. There could have been lots of other teams that wanted to sign Beanie, but he picked the Steelers, and now you're giving them a shot at him. And so I think for that reason, he is the guy I would think is least likely to clear waivers of that group. And therefore, I think he's safe with a spot on the 53-man roster. I'm just not sure if we go out there week 1, he would be the starting nickel corner or not.
Gotcha. Okay. I have 2 position groups. I want to ask how you feel about them now as opposed to at the beginning of this whole process, going back to even the spring. That would be the edge guys, because we've talked about that edge 4 spot. I just want to see where you're at with that now, but also the tight end room. How many do you think that they're going to end up keeping, and who are those guys?
Tight end, I'll go first. I think it's Pruitt, Hayward, Washington, Freiermuth.
Okay.
It kind of kills me to cut Rodney Williams. I think he's a really good special teamer. I think he can play. I think he's a good tight end. He's had that injury. I'm not sure he's 100%. I think if there's a guy the Steelers could lose on waivers, he feels like the most likely one to me. I can't make the roster work to get 5 tight ends on it. I think they're going to keep Pruitt.
That would be the one, right? I mean, it's Pruitt that would be the guy that wouldn't, I guess. Although we've talked about the world where maybe Connor Hayward doesn't necessarily fit what this offense wants to do, but at that same time, is it Coletto then that maybe would get the roster spot as opposed to another tight end if it wasn't Hayward being kept around?
I feel pretty good about Hayward making the team. Like
I mean, I do too, but I'm saying if he didn't, like the very slim chance that
it's like if he's not going to make the team, then it's maybe Coletto. Maybe that's the spot you take to get an extra wide receiver in the mix. If you really are feeling bad about the gunner spot, maybe keep Des Fitzpatrick around instead or something like that. I think Hayward's on the team though.
I do too. Yeah, I do too. Okay, then with the edge guys, how do you feel? Because Jeremiah Moon didn't see, he played 10 snaps against Buffalo, didn't see him in this game against Detroit at all. Does that mean Kyron Johnson's kind of got that spot locked up, you think? Or is it possible that they just go with like the 3 and kind of use DeMarvin Leal as the 4th? Like or is it an outside guy, I guess?
No, I think Kyron Johnson's got that spot. I think he's been good. Okay. He's also kind of got it by default because everybody else, Golden retired and Moon's hurt. I don't know what's going to happen to Moon, whether it's IR or I don't know. But I think he's not healthy. So, I mean, you can't cut him. And then, Welshoff got hurt also. There's nobody left. I mean, not that I think he was going to pass Kyron Johnson, but there's nobody else left. That's all the
I guess my question about it was because I didn't know, because we talked about how Scotty Miller kind of duplicates what you got in the receiver room. I feel like Kyron Johnson, just body type wise, is so similar to Nick Herbig. Would you rather opt for somebody not on the roster right now, like a bigger body, to be the edge 4 guy to spell the other guys?
I would like in an ideal world there to be a bigger edge 4. They just don't have one, and I think they're going to pick Kyron Johnson just because. And special teams, a good special teamer too.
Yeah, no, and he's had a good like if he didn't make this roster, I think he's carved out a spot for himself somewhere else. But I just, the redundancy that there might be there just because of the body type with Herbig is the reason that I was asking. The other thing that I wanted to ask you is, do you feel like you've learned anything about this team from the preseason, since the start of it, I should say? Like, did they answer any questions that you have, and what questions do you still have about this team as we gear up for week 1?
I feel like I learned some things. It was good to see Cordell Patterson show some speed. Like, I was getting concerned about not seeing it from him. So I think it was good to see it. I feel like we in terms of the running game in general, I think, like, I don't know how much of it we saw on the field in the preseason, but man, that joint practice with Buffalo, I think, really sticks out to me in a way that, like, I think they're going to be able to run the ball. I feel good about it. The depth of the defensive line, I think, is something, we've talked a lot about how well DeMarvin Leal played. I think Isaiahh Loudermilk has taken his game to another level. I think Keanu Benton looks like a freaking stud. I was on the Final Word last night. They asked for a breakout player this season. That was my pick. I think he's going to be a Pro Bowler, maybe not this year, but not too far in the future. Nick Herbig was a monster this preseason, led the NFL in sacks. Like, that's like, if you think about it, if they're in nickel, okay, the first 4, Watt, Highsmith, Ogunjobi, Hayward, Benton, Herbig coming in the second 4, like, that's absurd. Like, that's insane. And then, like, Leal probably in that mix, as well as he's been playing. I mean, the depth on the defense of front 7 is pretty incredible. Peyton Wilson was on the second team. That. There's a the Steelers' second team defense is probably, except for the secondary, but the second team front 7 is probably like a top 20 front 7 in the NFL.
Yeah. I mean, I can't disagree. And I feel like that's kind of flown under the radar because of the negative headlines coming out of the
nobody's talking about how good the defense has been. Everyone wants to freak out about the offense. The defense is doing incredible and incredible.
Yeah. What do you make of where the tackle depth is right now? I mean, 3 of the top 4 tackles right now dealing with something. Is it possible this organization goes to looking the outside for tackle help? I put a joke out there that they had Chooks commit 3 penalties yesterday trying to pull LeGarrette Blount and get himself cut to be able to come back to Pittsburgh. But we're not too late in the process. Teams are going to add other guys before the season here, but like realistically, somebody that could contribute. Do you think there's a shot that they add somebody from the outside?
I guess it depends on how bad Dylan Cook is hurt. Is this like 3 or 4 weeks? Is this half a season? I do expect him to start on IR. And then whether or not Troy Fautonu is ready for week 1. If Fautonu is able to play in week 1, even if you decide you don't want to start him, as long as he's able to serve as a backup, then I think they're in a pretty good place with the 3 they've got plus Spencer Anderson, who can play a little tackle. If he's hurt and not able to play in week 1, they have to add somebody. I don't know whether it'll be like Tykeem Doss or, somebody else from outside. But if he's not able to play in week 1, they can't just go in with 2 tackles. So they got to do something.
Was Tykeem Doss getting reps at tackle?
Yeah.
Well? Okay. All right. Well, I guess that answers that then. So what questions do you still feel like you have following the preseason about this team?
Whether the offensive line is going to be any good. I think it's one thing to add good young pieces, but like young offensive linemen are generally not very good. You have to be patient with them. I think they've got the right pieces. I just don't know if or when they're going to be good this year. I don't think they're good right now. I'm pretty sure about that. And so that's going to be a work in progress, something I don't feel like we know yet. The secondary depth is very untested. Like KZ is a vet. That's kind of the one they've got. I really like Corey Trice. I've really liked Corey Trice since the first day he got off the bus, but he's never played it down. Darius Rush has played maybe 30. Beanie Bishop's never played it down. Thomas Graham, very minimal NFL experience, if he has any. I don't remember off the top of my head. It's not a lot, though. He's played 11 games, and he's played 149 snaps of defense. So, there's not, Watts, even before he was hurt, had no experience. So, if they have injuries in the secondary, I know Jody Porter Jr. is banged up. He didn't practice today. I saw him in the locker room running away from Nick Herbig. So I guess he's not too hurt. I think he'll be okay. Corey Trice said he's okay. He had a little groin injury against Detroit, but the depth there is a real question mark. I said like the front 7, second team is really good. Second team secondary is very raw, and so I don't know. That to me is definitely an unknown.
Herbig chasing Joey around some Big Ten on Big Ten crime there. Both second-year players as well. Wonder what that was.
Half the locker rooms from the Big Ten, so I don't ever think about
that's true.
It that way. Like it's a very Big Ten locker room.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Let's talk about the receiver position real quick, because there's obviously been a bunch of talk still about Brandon Aiyuk, but another name that we've mentioned, I guess another team that we've mentioned to watch the wide receiver room for is the Houston Texans. Jordan Schultz put out there that there's been a ton of calls to the Houston Texans regarding the availability of John Metchie. Alan, I'd like to think that Omar Khan has been one of those teams that's at least touched base.
Yeah, I would. I can't confirm that. I haven't talked to anyone that's told me that, but I'd put all the money in my wallet that he has. And I'm sure they'll continue to be interested. The real question will become, the real rubber meets the road moment will be if the Texans are ready to make a deal and the 49ers are not, will Omar make a trade at the position before the 49ers have made a decision? That'll be very curious. And honestly, it's probably in the 49ers' benefit to try to wait him out a little bit and see if they can force that decision from Omar. If they can get to a point where they feel like they're costing him Metchie by delaying further, is he committed enough to getting Brandon Aiyuk that he's going to let? He did it. He let Jahan Dotson go. Will he continue to let other receivers go by in the pursuit of Brandon Aiyuk? Or is he going to stop and make another move and then potentially, further decrease the amount of draft capital they have to work with in 2025 if they decide to trade for Aiyuk or take themselves out of that conversation altogether by doing that? It's going to be very interesting here over the next, I'd say 48 hours.
Yeah, absolutely. Could John Metchie John Metchie and the Houston Texans, I should say, be the third team involved going to San Fran with Brandon Aiyuk coming to Pittsburgh?
Possible. possible. Yeah, that'd be a good fit for them.
I mean, if they want to, and Bobby Slowick, who is the Houston Texans offensive coordinator, came from San Fran. So you think John Metchie
terminology
could slide in there? I don't know, just something that I've thought about as a possible fit there. I don't know about John Metchie specifically, but I know that the Steelers have had interest in keeping an eye on that Houston Texans wide receiver room. With it, I mean, everybody probably does. It needs a receiver. That room specifically with how many NFL quality ones they have. But I was also told the Packers, and I think that's an interesting one to watch as well. A lot of people that I trust their eyes. Grant Dubose, who is over there.
Dude,
they need a gunner too.
You're singing to the choir here. So
yeah,
this Dubo's second year, right? So he was a 23 draft pick. I'm at the Senior Bowl, and at the Senior Bowl, you kind of got your list of guys. You're like, okay, these are the ones I want to focus in on. And Jaden Reed was one of those players that I really wanted to focus in on. Jaden Reed went to Michigan State. Well, at the Senior Bowl, they wear orange or gray or white jerseys with their Senior Bowl team, right? Or black. Sometimes they're black, whatever, orange, gray, white, or black. And they wear their team helmet, and they're not wearing their normal number because it's Senior Bowl. So, I don't know, Jaden Reed was wearing 17 or something like that. And so the only way you can really pick out who's who from across the field is the helmet, right? You're just like, oh, there's a Florida guy or there's an Alabama guy. And, you kind of learn over the course of the Senior Bowl, okay, well, there's two Alabama. Last year, there were two Georgia DBs, right? It was, okay, so you have to kind of narrow it down. It's like, is that Bullard or Smith, right? And then, okay, there's 1 year there was two Alabama offensive linemen, right? And then it's like, oh, is that whoever, Dante Brown, or is that, what was the name of the tackle? Raiders was a bust. Leatherwood, right? Yeah. And so, Jaden Reed, green helmet, on that same team was Grant Dubose, and he went to Charlotte. Charlotte's helmet looks just like Michigan State's helmet from that far away. I kept getting the two of them mixed up. They had one was 11 and one was 17. The numbers kind of looked, and Jaden Reed was a guy people talking about a second day pick. Grant Dubose was like a late add to the Senior Bowl roster that nobody had any expectation for. And I was like, this guy's freaking good. People are missing the boat on him. Turns out they both ended up in Green Bay. I wonder if the Packers had the same problem as me when they were breaking down the tape and they're like, hey, this 7th round pick looks just like the second round pick we're drafting. Maybe we should take them both. They ended up taking them both. Then the next year, Bo Melton is another guy that I really liked at the Senior Bowl. He's there. I think they have too many, probably. They can maybe get them all in there. It's Watson, Dobbs, Reed, Dontavian Wicks, Melton, Dubose. That's 6. I know they have Malik Heath, who they kind of like. And so, I don't know. They can probably get all 6 in there if they really want to. But if I was the Steelers, I'd be calling about Grant Dubose or Bo Melton, man. I think Grant Dubose as a receiver and a gunner is an absolute 10 out of 10 fit. I think he's a really good player, considering he's a 7th round pick. I'm not saying he's Jerry Rice, but I'm fired up about the idea of Grant Dubose being available. He's one of my guys.
Yeah, I mean, and like you said, what he can contribute on special teams as well. That's exactly what the Steelers are looking for. So I think it'd be perfect. To your point, if they don't feel like they got to get Malik Heath on that roster, they can get the 6 that you talked about there. I mean, would you be willing to part? Are you only kind of interested if it's, one of them not making the 53, or would you be willing to part with a draft pick or maybe like a pick swap to do it in that case? If you were the Steelers, do you think that they are that good? The players
I'd trade a 7th rounder for Grant Dubose in a heartbeat. The Steelers have 3 of them. Pick swap takes even less pressure off it. So yeah, I'd do that. Melton is not as good of a special teamer. Maybe you'd have to wait for him to get cut. But Dubose, I would send a 7th round pick for Dubose today without ever thinking about. Even if you think you're still going to get Aiyuk or Metchie or someone else, I would just take Dubose. Just because he's like a way better version of what you have in Scotty Miller. He's bigger, he's faster, he's a better punt gunner. I think that's a perfect that's a perfect fit.
Yeah, that's the situation you're talking about where I brought up where, you need two receivers if you're going to have one of them be the gunner, and you get your gunner, obviously, in DuBose there from Green Bay. Another name that I saw people kind of putting the eye emojis on for, and I'll just be upfront about it. I don't get this one. Was Donovan Peoples-Jones, who was released by the Lions, former Brown. That's where people are probably familiar with him there. At one point, felt like he was an intriguing player. Those Michigan wide receivers, they're always kind of tough to evaluate in college because they don't have the production. Look at what Nico Collins has turned into. But Donovan Peoples-Jones, like I said, I thought was an intriguing guy with Cleveland. It just, I don't know what people would see at this point. Like, I mean, to me, he is a guy that would be cut, and I don't know that I have any interest in the Steelers adding him to this team.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I don't see much there.
Like, to be honest with you, Alan, I feel like if he was added to this roster before the spring, he also could have been somebody falling into that Quez Watkins bucket where we're talking about him being cut right now.
Yeah, like, the Steelers are going to cut Quez Watkins. Why would they want Donovan Peoples-Jones? It's like the same guy. I mean, they're different players, but it's very similar situationally.
Yeah. So I don't know. I'd be interested to get other people's thoughts on that. I saw a couple people on Twitter kind of putting the eye emojis out there. Steelers Twitter, I should say specifically, putting the eye emojis out there for Donovan Peoples-Jones. I'm certainly not in that boat, but maybe, some people out there are. Alan, we always try to get to at least one question when we can on here, and we got a pretty good one. I don't know if this is cheating or not, but I'm pulling this from a Morning Rush episode, not an Afternoon Drive episode. So, we'll
allow it. We'll allow it this time. Just,
okay.
Okay.
All right. Varzak here said, I would rather have Lee than Loudermilk. He hasn't done anything in his 3 years here. He's had his chance.
Yeah, I mean, I got to disagree. I think Isaiahh Loudermilk is a very good run stopper. I think he continues to show promise in this pass rush. Thought he was the best defensive lineman on the field against the Lions. And he's just a lot better player. It's funny. I talked to Loudermilk today about this and this like exact topic. And it's like, I think fans like fall in love with youth and potential, and like, rookies suck. Like all of them. Like I talked to Loudermilk literally about like, do you ever watch your rookie tape? He's like, I try really hard not to. He's like, sometimes if like it's the same team, like we're playing like the Browns again, and I played them as a rookie, and because they have the same offensive linemen, like it's the same matchup, they've had the same Stefanski system. So like it's like sometimes it'll be in the cut-ups, and I'll just try not to watch. He's like, because it was awful. And that's rookies are bad. Promise does not equal ability. And I think this draft class in particular, that day 3 was kind of a wasteland. Man, if the Steelers end up with like a reserve safety in Ryan Watts plus a starting nickel in Beanie Bishop out of their day 3 plus UDFA, they will have done better on the 3rd day plus UDFA than every other team in the league. Like it was the worst day 3 in the draft I can remember. I said this back in the spring that like draft picks are going to get cut. Logan Lee isn't even healthy right now. He didn't play against Detroit. He didn't practice today. My prediction for him is full season IR stash, that they're just going to give him a redshirt year.
Okay.
I thought it was obvious from watching the preseason. He needs to get bigger and stronger. I don't know what's wrong with him injury wise, but it's not close to me between him and the top 7 defensive linemen. You're not going to keep 8. It's not even like remotely close. And Loudermilk was playing over Leal last year. Like, do people forget that?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I was going to bring Leal into this conversation too, Alan, because not to single out this specific comment, but I just see this a lot. And I feel like this comment would be operating under the assumption that like players just can't get better. We've seen Isaiahh Loudermilk get better. It's not like it's the same player that we're talking about 3 years ago. Like, so I think it's kind of pointless to bring up that he's had his shot here for 3 years now. If he is one of their best options, then he's one of their best options. Notice like DeMarvin Leal wasn't part of this conversation because of how good he's looked and the steps he's taken. So why is it not fair to drop or why is it fair to not have Isaiahh Loudermilk in that same bucket where he's a player that is still on the ascent?
Yeah, I think Isaiahh Loudermilk's a good player. Like he's not flashy. He's not a great pass rusher. He's not going to do things that get you noticed, but I think he largely does the job that he's being asked to do. He's a pretty good rotational run stuffing defensive end. I don't have a problem with Isaiahh Loudermilk on a 53-man roster. I think the Steelers' defensive line is really good. Really, really good.
Would you have Loudermilk ahead or behind Dean Lowry?
That's a good question. I don't know that I've seen enough of Dean Lowry to feel like really comfortable with how good he is. He had that calf injury, missed most of training camp. I think right now I would have Loudermilk ahead of Lowry. Right now, I would say if it's a rundown, give me Loudermilk and Lowry. And if it's a pass down, give me Leal and Lowry.
Yeah. Okay. That's fair. And as far as Lee, my take on that, I wasn't expecting to see him this year, regardless. You mentioned it. I said it to you before we started recording that I was trying, I'm not trying to take shots here, but I do feel like this is I don't know about historically, but at least in my lifetime, a very weak, maybe the weakest day 3 that we've seen. So I agree. If they can get Ryan Watts out of this, if they can get Beanie Bishop out of this, they'll have done very well for themselves with what they came out of on day 3 with.
I didn't stash him, and you hope it works out in the future. We've seen lots of guys go to the practice squad and end up being pretty good players. Sure. I don't think that's the end of the world if that's the route he takes. Or
I thought he was destined for the practice squad.
Yeah, I think he was drafted. I think he was drafted with the intention of going to the practice squad. But I also thought it was like a little shot at Leal that like he couldn't just coast to a roster spot this year, that they were going to give him some push. And
well, if that's
man, did he take the push? Man,
you know what?
Did he take the
Actually, for that reason, Logan Lee pick was a great pick.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think he can't be a good player. I just think they have a lot better defensive linemen right now.
Sure.
I think Willington Prevalon's pretty darn good too. I would be. I'm not. If I think I would take Prevalon over Lee if I had to take one. Like, let's say,
to play immediately. Yeah.
Somebody's out this week, right? Like, let's see. Leal breaks his toe tomorrow or whatever. I think I might take Prevalon over Lee. Right? And he's a pretty good player. I was really surprised by him.
Yeah. No, that's fair. I agree. That's what if I needed somebody right now to play, Lee is probably pretty low on that list. But that's not to say that defines what his career is going to look like. To your point, I just think with what they want him to be,
that's one of the things I learned this training camp preseason. So Logan Lee needs to be a little bit better. Yeah.
There you go. All right, good stuff as always. Alan, tell the people where they can find you.
At @Saunders_PGH, PGH Steelers Now, SteelersNow.com. Like and subscribe to YouTube channel, hit that bell for notifications. Find us on TikTok, Steelers Afternoon Drive. Do this again tomorrow.
We talked a lot about a lot of different things in this episode. Appreciate the comments that we always get, but specifically when we're going through things here, I make sure, or I try to make sure certain things I really want your guys' opinion and feedback on the topics that we're talking about as well. So let's know how you feel about, even the players that were cut today by the Steelers. I don't think there were any surprises in there at this point. We have talked about this on and off air. We don't think that there's necessarily a surprise cut coming, especially with kind of the way that the injuries have made that. I guess I was kind of hoping maybe they could get something similar to like the Browns did in a trade for a Matthew Wright, because I think that he is an NFL kicker. But clearly that wasn't coming.
I think it's a little interesting that they cut him early. Remember last year they kept Braden Mann, dangled him for a whole extra day to try to make a trade. Seems like they were pretty quick to move on from Wright this time. I thought that was an interesting contrast. I'm not quite sure what it means.
Who knows? But yeah, love your guys' feedback. So keep that coming in the comments. Any questions as well? Obviously, like I said, we try to get to at least one every single episode. There's a 5-star review. If you're listening somewhere else, Apple, Spotify, wherever your podcast from, subscribe over there as well. Just search Steelers Afternoon Drive. Alan said find us on TikTok, Steelers Afternoon Drive, trying to post there as much as possible as well. And you can find me everywhere, Zachary Smith, PGH. For Alan Saunders and myself, thanks for jumping in, taking another ride on the Steelers Afternoon Drive.